You know, some places have organized formally. Personally, I've never felt like turning it into an official organization.
Tea Party?
Yeah, that requires rules and platforms and stuff like that, and I'm not very good at those sorts of things. So.
Well, some of the Tea Party members went into the Republican Party.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, that's always been the thing, is it's not about endorsing, and we invited all the candidates here tonight. You know, I know some of them chose not to show up.
Heidi too?
What's that?
Heidi?
Yes. Yeah, everybody.
You didn't send nobody to give us a speech?
Unfortunately, no. Did you want?
Just 2 seconds.
I'll take 3.
Thanks, Rob. I'm Jim Simmons. I live here in Minot. I'm the treasurer for the Minot Area Republican Council, and I'm also publish a newsletter once a month. If you're interested in getting on our emailing list, I'll be over here in the corner. But about 8-9 days from now is the State Fair Parade in Minot. And Kevin, do you have a float? Okay, great.
We need walkers and riders.
Yeah, so I've promised Congressman Berg for the last 2 years I'd be in his parade, and I wasn't able to. 2 years ago I had a business meeting I had to go to, and last year we didn't have a parade, so I'm going to be in the parade for Congressman Berg, but we need some support for Kevin. And so if you want to walk in the parade, come back here and see Randy and Kevin and Lindsay and find out what you need to do, but basically show up over by McDonald's, and when you see somebody you recognize, walk in the parade, hand out candy. If you're lucky, you'll get a Kevin Cramer t-shirt. There you go. So I just want to say, so please get involved. I'm not asking for money, but I'm asking for your support by showing the candidates you're supporting by walking the State Fair Parade. We're so fortunate it's here in Minot. Thanks.
Anybody else want to speak? Well, if not, I think we'll wrap things up kind of nice and short, but one of the nice things is getting together and talking with one another and getting to know one another and knowing that even within our community we're not alone. There are conservatives out there. It can feel a little lonely sometimes, especially at night, sitting in front of the computer screen, reading about all these things about how silly conservatism is and how Tea Partiers are extremists and everything, and I don't really see a lot of extremists here tonight. But anyway, thank you all for showing up. I really appreciate it. Oh.
I would like to ask Kevin to expand a little bit. I understand about 80% of the ag budget is food stamps. Okay. Is that correct?
Matt's question was about what percentage of the quote farm bill aren't necessarily farm related. You're thinking 80%. I don't. Kate, where's Kate? She might know that right.
Here, I think it might be more than that.
I think it's close to like 90. It's a very high percentage. Here's the way the farm bill works, and we call it the farm bill because it's a farm bill to us. It always carries some other name that sounds much more, I guess, general than that. The way the farm states, especially senators, are able to get support for, and I guess House members probably as much or more, to get support for the farm bill. In other words, the commodity titles, the farm titles to the farm bill is by attaching it to this much larger bill, which is the food stamp or the nutrition programs. So it's simply a way of building political coalitions to pass the law. But the savings that we talk about, you hear about these huge, quote, huge cuts over 10 years. And that Senate bill is $23.6 billion, and the House bill is $35 billion of cuts over 10 years. When you start, first of all, stretching it out over 10 years, those aren't huge cuts. When you talk about the cuts in the House bill, for example, from 23.6 to 35 billion, that 11 plus billion is all in the nutrition program. None of it is from the farm piece of it. You'll hear liberal farm state candidates refer to these huge cuts in the farm bill in the House side. They're not cuts to the farm bill, they're cuts to the other parts of the bill, not the farm bill. And so it's interesting because my opponent, who you probably know, Matt, fairly well, she was making quite a to-do about this yesterday. These huge cuts in the nutrition program. And so I was asked by this reporter, actually she said, but what about the people that depend on that? And I said, that's the problem. We don't want them to depend on it. We want them to depend on a stronger economy that creates wealth and jobs and opportunities for people. But if you make food stamps perpetual, much like unemployment benefits perpetual, you give people more of an incentive not to work than to work. And that's what I oppose so strongly. Because you not only rob them, you rob them of their dignity. You rob them of their human dignity. And when you love the community, so to speak, more than the individual, that's the position you take. That's why we're Tea Partiers and conservatives, and they're not. But here's the even better, Matt. Today on the radio, explaining herself to some callers that I didn't get to hear it, but I heard about it. She started talking about these important nutrition programs. Now, are you ready for this? This is why it's so important. Because kids aren't eating enough fruits and vegetables. And I, as your future congresswoman, should be able to force it on them because their parents aren't doing a good enough job, because who knows better how to raise a children than members of Congress, after all. When I say liberty itself is on the ballot, this is what I'm talking about. These are well-meaning people. They are. They're big-hearted, compassionate people. They're just wrong about who is best suited to determine the menu for our children. They're wrong about who's best suited to determine what crop to plant in what field than the landowner. You know what I've learned? Randy is such a... You guys, if I went out and drafted up the job description, hired a firm to go find the best person to be on the North Dakota Public Service Commission, they'd come up with Randy Christman. Because he understands this so well. Because he works the land. He grazes the land with his cattle. You know what I've learned as a regulator, an industry and energy regulator over the last 9 years on the Public Service Commission? There is no bureaucrat at the EPA, at the Bureau of Land Management, at the Department of the Interior, at the USDA, or in Bismarck, North Dakota, that's going to take care of somebody's land better than the guy that owns it. Isn't it amazing? When you trust the natural order of things and the natural relationship between the landowner and the corporate citizen, things work out generally pretty well. And that's why being a reluctant regulator is an appropriate role for a guy like Randy Christman.
One other question.
Yes.
Your opponent gets most of her money from Dorgan?
Matt says my opponent, he forms this statement in the form of a question. Your opponent?
She worked for him.
My opponent used to work for Byron Dorgan. You're correct. And there's nothing inherently bad about that, but Matt's point was, doesn't she get most of her money from Byron Dorgan? We'll find out here in a few days where she gets most of her money from. She's raised a lot of money. She's raised, I think, over $500,000. She doesn't have that much, but she's raised that much. Most of it from out of state, because she was the hand-picked Democrat last fall. That's how they do it over there. We had 6 Republicans running for the nomination on our side of the aisle. They handpicked one early and anoint them. And then Nancy Pelosi made her a high target in her red to blue campaign as a major player in helping Nancy Pelosi become Speaker of the House. Now, you could hate my guts, but I guarantee you I won't vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. That ought to be enough. And so she's funneled a lot of money that way. I'm sure her relationship with Senator Dorgan's been helpful, and yes, most of her fundraising. We haven't started our Washington fundraising yet, but we've done pretty well in North Dakota. Any other questions while I'm on a roll? Oh, yes.
Okay, now, is it against the Constitution to buy votes? Isn't that what the Democratic Party doing, buy votes with all this giveaway?
Well, is it against the Constitution to buy votes? I'm sure it's against a lot of things to buy votes, including the laws of the United States and of North Dakota. Your point being a philosophical one, I think. Aren't they just really buying favor with things like stimulus? Let's get back to energy.
Even with the food.
Even with, interesting point. The other day I was watching on the day that the bill was marked up, or the day before the ag bill was marked up, or maybe it was yesterday. I lose track of time. I don't sleep anymore. But somebody made the point, this point exactly. They said, but isn't the reason for these big bumps in the food programs? And by the way, there's an interesting component in these bills. It states how much the appropriation is for it, and then it has 5 more words, or as much as is determined to be necessary, or something to that effect. And it grew by $11 billion last year without any vote. Are they buying the votes of those people? Well, here's what I believe. This commentator on one of the news shows was asked about this, and he said, well, why are Democrats opposing the Republican cuts in the House in the nutrition program? Is this because the Democrats are trying to win over the food stamp vote? And this very brilliant, no doubt, Rhodes Scholar analyst said, I'm pretty sure Barack Obama already has the food stamp vote. But it raises a bigger question, doesn't it, about philosophy and the governed. And that is, we are on this bubble, ladies and gentlemen, where 49.5% of the Americans that could pay taxes do not. And they pound on the wealthiest, the job creators, the wealth creators, for not paying their fair share. Because when you get over to the 50% mark, and you have more people taking from the government than paying into it, you now have everybody right where you want them if you're a liberal. Right? And so, the bigger point, I think, is that. Sure. The more dependent, the more people that are dependent on the government, the more power the government has over the people. And you rob them of their dignity, and you take control. We cannot let that happen this time.
It's like they're helpless.
But you know what's a funny thing about Americans? And it's really true of North Dakotans. You're right. You can feel helpless. That's what eventually happens. And that's why I think this Obamacare thing is so interesting. And Rob, your point about the CNN polls that say people are fatigued with the argument, the debate, I think there may be some truth to that. But I was just thinking the other day, I have never seen an issue with so much staying power as this one. And that's encouraging to me, because here's what I believe. The one thing that the Barack Obamas of the world miscalculate is that there's one thing, one commodity more precious than every other in this country. And it is liberty that is embedded in us. It's our culture. It's our DNA. And we know we're losing it when we see it. The tragedy of it is, ladies and gentlemen, is that it took this long to see the slow deterioration of it. The Tea Party is a product of Obamacare. And it's not hard to believe when you consider that for conservatives, we're not naturally activists, are we? We just kind of want to mind our own business, and we wish everyone else would do the same. We'll choose the charities we want to be involved in, right? And so along comes this thing that says, you have to have this product, and we're going to rig it in such a way as to we'll be the only provider for it eventually.
One other area I'd like to get a comment on. It seems like the Democrats really jump on somebody who's successful. Is this part of their class warfare thing?
Sure.
We have a war against women, we have a war against rich people. You gotta be unsuccessful if you're a Democrat. Huh?
I was asked by a reporter yesterday, the Fargo Forum is doing this feature story evidently on the influence of the, quote, oil industry on North Dakota politics. And I was answering these questions as honestly and innocently as I know how, and as transparently as I always am. I said, sure, it's changed It's bound to. It's an important industry, much like agriculture has its influence. It ought to. It ought to be more involved in political. The issues of infrastructure development, the issues of mineral rights, and all of the issues that come around all of that are important issues. So it's going to, you know, people are going to be involved and they're going to be weighing those issues. And she said, well, yeah, but I'm talking about the money. The money. I said, well, sure, you have a whole different group of people that have an interest. You know who one of the great, important special interest groups in this country right now that oppose Barack Obama are? It's the pipe fitters union, the pipe layers union, because he refuses, with the stroke of a pen, to allow the Keystone XL pipeline to be built, putting hundreds, if not thousands, of union workers out of work.
So
That wasn't what she was looking for.
you know, so you should have it made, you're not a millionaire, and the Democrats shouldn't attack you.
I am a bit of an oddball in that regard. I have no wealth. If I lost my job, we'd pay, you know, we'd live for a month, and then we'd have to find something else to do. But, that said, Matt, I detest as much as anything. My daddy was a rural electric lineman. My mom pumped gas at the local Senate station when I grew up, did whatever we could, whatever she could to provide for us. I resent class warfare more than anything. Here's one of the questions she asked me that was implied, that she had an implication in this question, and I called her on the implication. She said, but I've noticed that a lot of oil executives have given money to you, and that frankly, most of the oil money goes to Republicans. I said, well, of course it does. No kidding. Do you have a point here? And she said, well, why is that? I said, your question presumes something inherently evil about that. I said, people give money to politicians not to affect the politician, but the outcome of the election. They give it not to buy favor from the politician, but to hopefully influence the outcome because they support a politician or candidate that most closely mirrors their views. I don't expect to get a lot of money from the ACLU. Even though
knocking on their door?
I'm not, but I don't have any problem with my opponent getting it. The fact that Nancy Pelosi matched out to my opponent is not problematic for me. Because, ladies and gentlemen, as Tea Partiers, we are nothing if not supporters of the Constitution of the United States. And I said to this reporter, I said, I know that your editorial board doesn't like it one bit, that I take money, that I've gotten contributions from people who work in the coal mines of North Dakota. And they've been very clear that they think that that's problematic. But I've never heard them complain about the Sierra Club giving money to my opponent. I would never deny the First Amendment rights to somebody who disagrees with me, and I don't expect my opponent to have a problem with the First Amendment rights of somebody who does agree with me. I would take rigorous debate and freedom of expression any day, lest we lose it. Lest we lose it. And editorial boards of all people ought to be champions of the First Amendment, right? Thanks for those questions, Matt. God dang it. Yes, Roger.
What can you tell us about the treaties that are currently being negotiated, and some even signed under the cover of darkness, like Small Arms Treaty, National Defense Authorization Act, etc., because doesn't the Constitution say that any treaty will become the law of the land and will be upheld by the judicial system?
I have a terrible problem with anything that's not transparent. One thing, some people call me reckless, you know, and that may be, but I like full transparency, Roger. I'm very concerned about it. There are a lot of things that happen in the dark in this administration, and frankly, some of that happened in previous Republican administrations, and it was no better then. We might think of a more noble outcome, or you may not, but it's nonetheless, when you abuse that transparency, be prepared to have it used on you. And so I'm very concerned about it, and I think we've got to clean it up. There are lots of other deals in the form of negotiations that go on between the administration and environmental groups as much as anything. The EPA right now has anywhere from 8 to 20 major rulemakings that affect North Dakota farmers, ranchers, energy industry all at the same time, costing millions of dollars to fight, to litigate, to oppose, to lobby against. And what happens so oftentimes is these real extreme environmental groups, much like one that's suing me right now, they'll file a frivolous lawsuit in federal court. And then they'll file it against, like in the case of me, they have a problem with certain contributions I've received, legal contributions I've received, so they sue me in federal court, not really me, they sue the Secretary of the Interior in federal court over our federal coal program in hopes of getting a settlement agreement under the Cloak of Night. So that's, but remember, this is the most transparent administration in the history of America.
I understand that.
Yeah. This is the one that Heidi Heitkamp and Pam Gulson
In
support.
fact, he's so transparent, you can see right through.
Yeah, you can see that. Oh, we're on a roll now.
I got a question, being to a cylinder and all this is coming up, what would you do different so that stuff wouldn't be around here?
Well, let me be very clear. He asked about Solyndra, and there are lots of others. Let's talk about green energy specifically, okay? Because obviously, the president has used a lot of stimulus dollars to allow investments by the government into private enterprises that private investors won't invest in, for the most part. Part of the green agenda and part of taking care of people politically.
Isn't the US government paying $26 a gallon for fuel right now for one of their ships?
That could be, I don't know, Dwayne, whether that's true, but the federal government is a big user of energy, so they can be a major anchor tenant, if you will, purchaser of a lot of things like that. Let me speak for a moment to energy policy, okay? And because one of the traps that I'm trying to avoid, and I watch a lot of people walk into it. In fact, I was at a pretty major event here recently with a bunch of oil folks for another candidate, and they started talking about the need to have a national energy policy. And you'll hear a lot of well-meaning Republicans talk about the need for a, quote, national energy policy. And I always, now here I am, here's the reluctant regulator, Rob, in me. I say, really? We don't trust the federal government with anything else. Why would we trust them with an energy policy? Why would we want them choosing the form of electric generation that comes to my home? Why would we want them to choose the type of fuel I put in my vehicle? Or worse, choose the vehicle I can drive? Choose how often I can have my lights on and off, and what the temperature in my house ought to be in. All of these things. Here's what I think the national energy policy ought to be. Let the consumer decide. It'll be the best, most efficient way. Ladies and gentlemen, we're the second leading producer of oil in the country. We're the #1 producer of lignite coal. We're the 6th leading exporter of electricity in the nation, generated largely by burning that lignite coal. We generate natural gas. We actually produce natural gas out of coal in this state. We are right now at the epicenter of the universe in energy development. We're acknowledged for it, we're rewarded for it, and we're belittled for it by liberals. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, because we trust the landowner, because much of our oil is under private land, not federal land, we have the cleanest air in the country. We're one of 8 states that meet the ambient air quality standards as prescribed by this EPA, whose zeal would shut it all down if they could. We have some of the cleanest lakes and rivers in the country, and we have the most productive topsoil in the country. And yet these bureaucrats in Washington know better how to create an energy policy than we do. I trust states working with local citizens and legislators and local officials way more than I trust a federal bureaucrat. We don't need a national energy policy. We need the federal government to stay out of our hair and let the free markets work and let local regulators make them happen. And so let me wrap up with this one then. Although I will answer more questions now. I always say that the same guy who created the beauty of the Badlands, the majesty of our prairies, the richness of our topsoil, put the minerals underneath it. He put the minerals underneath it. It's all a gift. And he made us his most precious creation, people, as stewards of these. You want to know one thing about regulation, laws, rules. God gave us 10 really good ones. We've passed about 10 million to screw up the original 10. The problem is most laws and regulations are the outcome of somebody's abuse of one of the original 10. So we have a responsibility as well, don't we, to be good stewards of law. And not everybody in the country is as good at it as we are. That's what I think what we ought to do is export Rick Berg and Kevin Cramer to join John Hoban, and we'll get that place squared away too. Question for Andy Chrisman. He's really smart. Really.
I got a question for you. Illegal immigration,
I'm against illegal immigration.
I understand that, but how do you go about correcting that?
Yeah, great question. And let me, a couple of things. First of all, the first highest priority has got to be to secure our borders. Why we are so afraid of that, I do not know. As I mentioned earlier, Chris and I, my wife Chris is with me. She's driver, head fundraiser, and the mother of all 5 of my children, including the 5-year-old. Doesn't she look good for having such young children? Yeah. The thing about securing the borders, and the thing that I learned about through adoption, it's harder for a good Christian couple to adopt a baby from a foreign country and get them into the United States, and it usually costs them tens of thousands of dollars to do it, than it is for a criminal to walk across the border into our country and take somebody else's job. That doesn't make sense to me. We've got to secure the borders first. I do not support amnesty for people who came here illegally. But I also know this, and this is where I can get in trouble in some crowds, perhaps this one. I also don't necessarily, in fact I get downright uncomfortable sometimes about sort of people that oversimplify the problem as well. Because even an illegal immigrant probably came here for a better opportunity than they had in their own country. So we need to work much, much stronger, much, much more closely to have a good, solid immigration policy that deals with all things going forward. How we deal with the existing immigrants in this country, certainly we ought to be able to find out who they are. They can find me anywhere. Jake follows me all over the place. He's the Democrat tracker, and he does a great job, and we love Jake a lot. But he always knows where I am. I know we can find them and export those that need to be. But how we treat the children that were born here and the grandchildren and whatnot, I'm not as comfortable with just saying we ought to just toss them out of the country. But I also know this, that people of faith, that the charities of this country, that the churches and synagogues of this nation, if we work with our government, and our government is willing to work with us, we can work it out. We're sophisticated, smart people. This doesn't have to be the problem that it's become.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What would happen if I go down to Mexico illegally?
Yeah.
And what would happen if I got picked up down there? Would I be thrown away, or?
I don't know what the Mexican officials would do with you.
I don't think they give me amnesty.
They might throw you back. I don't know. I don't know what they would do. I'm not the scenario you just described is one of the worst case scenarios. I'm talking about people who were born here,
Well,
and I don't want.
My wife went down there, and she had a baby down there. Would they get Mexican citizenship?
I don't know whether
I don't think so.
They may or may not, but we're not Mexico.
No, but I mean.
We're exceptional. We're exceptional.
I don't think any other country would take us in either.
I don't aspire to be like any other country. That's the beauty of us.
Yeah.
Right?
But why do we have to bring
We don't have to. We don't have to, but we're better. than
Oh,
they are.
yeah, we're much better than, but it doesn't make sense. It does not make sense.
Well, here's my point back to my original. It's not as simple as all of that. As nice as it would be, rhetorically it is, but realistically, we know that it's not. Because we don't do that with people. They may, but that's also why Mexicans flee here and we don't flee there. Right? Oh boy, okay, yeah. You tell me when I'm done, okay? Well, you're on, okay.
What's your view on Israel?
What's my view on Israel? Well, first of all, my view on Israel is, first of all, biblical. And second of all, they are our one and most trustworthy friend in the Middle East, and we ought to do everything in our power and everything we can to support them. And we need to make sure that they are secure. We need to make sure that they have the systems and the authority, acknowledge the right to defend themselves against all enemies. Having said that, I also am quite certain this, again, another